think we should dive straight into gridless first because
for
those of you who have been here before, a lot of it is Thomas and I talking about network hash rates, luck, volatility, these things.
We have a proper guest now.
And we like to, in a somewhat masturbatory fashion, talk about some of these terms of art that those who lurk on Bitcoin mining Twitter would know very well. But I think we have a far more interesting guest today. So I guess, Eric, do you maybe want to start off even before we jump into this and just give some background on yourself and gridless as well, and kind of what got you into Bitcoin and what started with the company?
Yeah. So my name's Eric. I grew up in Sudan and Kenya, as you could probably tell as soon as you saw me this evening. And one of my schoolmates actually is a grade behind me, but much smarter than me, is in the back of the room right now.
But there is
he's the guy who went to Columbia. I didn't. But we, I've been doing businesses and building technology companies in Africa and Kenya for about 2 decades now. And I knew about Bitcoin in 2010. I was in the midst of building the largest tech hub on the continent, 17,000 members, like 4 floors in a building, a big space. So we knew all about it, but I didn't have any conviction on it yet. And I wanted to. We had a supercomputer cluster, and I was like, "Hey, why don't we put this to work?" But I didn't really even have the conviction to really push that, so we didn't. And that happened in 2011. In 2014, I almost started mining again. In 2016, I almost started mining again, and I never did. And so I finally sold my last company in 2022, and I was like, you know what? I'm doing Bitcoin mining, one way or the other. And that's so gridless really came from this. Conviction of actually reading into and learning about Bitcoin for real, understanding why it was different, and then calling up a bunch of energy guys all across East Africa and saying, "Hey, how much would it cost to do mining with you?" It turns out that there's guys who build these off-grid energy sites. It was news to me, and what they're doing is they're selling to that local community, but they're selling at 36 cents to over $1 per kilowatt. And you cannot mine at those numbers, right? And so we were like, okay, that's not going to work. And it turns out, but also that they have a lot of stranded power. So at most, they'll have the most we've ever seen on a 15-year-old site is a 36% utility, right? So that means that there's a lot of wasted energy. And so
the most you've seen is 37% of the power generated is what's actually being utilized. Right. The rest is just like ephemerally wasted.
Yeah, it's like water that just keeps flowing down the river. Then it's never used.
Is it all hydro?
So there's a lot of solar mini grids, but solar doesn't make sense for Bitcoin mining.
Retweet.
We do a ton with hydro. We also
does with tax subsidies, but never mind.
Well, if you have somebody who'll drop 3x the money on batteries, it'll work.
This is true, and it turns out actually a lot of things work with subsidies. If you just need enough of them. And just to double click on one key thing, there, when you talk about this energy being wasted, you're literally saying water going down the river that did not go through the hydroelectric turbine.
Mostly. So what they have also is called a dump load. So if they make more energy than can be used by the community, they'll just. It's actually phenomenal. I should pull up a picture of it. They have water heaters attached to a big drum of water, and they just burn the energy into those heaters because it takes a ton of energy to heat water, right? And they burn the energy that way instead of overloading the grid.
And then it just turns to steam and disappears, right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, because it actually, one thing that is this may be surprising, but for certain types of generation, it can be hard to like waste energy, or like sometimes if you have methane or natural gas in a pipeline, you have too much of it, or if you're say in the state of Colorado and you're trying to extract oil and there's some methane coming out, you can't burn that. The only way you can burn that methane is to basically do exactly that. You basically run it through a generator and then run it through some radiators, but there's just no water that you're boiling. But so okay, but all the way of saying that this is clearly you saw tangible waste, while at the same time super expensive prices for this electricity.
Yeah, and so what happens is if you're in a rural community, you've never had power. What do you think happens first? What do when you finally have power? You don't have much disposable income. What do you think?
download TikTok.
Yeah, well, that is true. But you charge your cell phone because you have a cell phone, and you buy an LED light bulb, right? Guess what? They don't use very much energy, right? And it takes the time it takes to use all the energy that's being generated now by your local hydro takes 10 years before you start seeing people buy refrigerators or stoves or TVs.
And so, I get it, which basically kind of not to show what happens at the end of the movie at the beginning, but like this brings you to gridless, which basically you're thinking it's not just we don't have enough cheap energy, so we need to make more energy to make the energy cheaper, but we also need basically a load bank to take this energy once we build it, and so that leads us to sort of the gridless model. Sort of today.
Well, actually, just to jump in there. So, like everywhere in the world, if you're building energy, you have an industrial off-taker every single time. There's an anchor tenant who's the primary buyer of that energy. It's usually a large, very, very large industry or a couple of large industries, right? No surprise that if you build energy in the middle of nowhere, it's really hard to find anchor tenants, right? Who is going to show up with their industry into a village in rural Africa? There's not a lot. Like the biggest off-taker will be the local cell phone tower, which is not using a ton of power, right? And maybe somebody will then start setting up a grain mill, right? Guess what? It's on and off 5 times a day and doesn't use very much power. So that's the biggest problem. So all of a sudden, you have this geographically agnostic buyer of last resort called Bitcoin mining that with a Starlink can sit anywhere in the world and tap into this global network that prices energy, right? And that's what we do, right? So we deploy into these locations and we say, hey, we're going to be your buyer of last resort. Because we're doing that, we're not paying 36 cents a kilowatt hour. We will give you 30% of the Bitcoin we mine, and we're going to take 70%. I'm going to cover all the capex. I'm going to cover all my opex, right? That's why I'm getting 70%. You're going to get 30%. And we set it up, and they start making money, and they can now fully monetize the full capacity of their energy output.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug. We do Twitter Spaces just before as a table setter for these talks.